Flack Talk with James Canning, the podcast with the inside scoop on journalists from San Diego and across the nation. If you're a communications pro, have a nose for news, or you're just nosy, this is a podcast for you. Now here's your host, James Canning.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Flack Talk. This is your host, James Canning. I'm here with Jerome Vaughn. He is the news director for WDET in Detroit, Michigan. It's the local NPR station there. How you doing, Jerome?
Good to be with you, James.
Thanks for being with me. So Jerome and I go way back to my time in Detroit. He was always a friendly face and voice in Detroit. We could have a real conversation about the stories they were doing, whether they were good ones or bad ones. And I think I learned a lot from Jerome over the years. I mean, the reality is that his station was my first introduction into NPR stations, and I started to really learn the importance of them when it came to fair, nonpartisan, journalism. And so, Jerome, you and your team there at WDET, I didn't get a chance to do an internship when I was at Wayne State, but my time working for Bob Berg and then eventually the mayor's office, it's really when I felt like I got the chance to understand and learn your station. So thank you for that.
Well, you are very welcome. We try to make sure that we focus on the news and play it straight, and also try to train young journalists too. I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to do an internship with us. We do a lot of internships here.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to get into that a little later in our conversation. But this is, this show's about you. It's my goal is to turn the microphone around on the journalists, share what people don't know about journalists who they may listen to on the radio or they read in the paper or see on television. And so I'd love to just dig into some questions about you so that our listeners get to know you. Is that okay? Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So let's kind of start from the beginning. I've known you, but of course I do my homework. I learned that at my journalism classes at Wayne State University. I do your homework before you go in and interview anyone. And so in all of the homework I was doing, I found this thing about a yellow Panasonic ball and chain radio. Tell me, how did that become the inspiration for the career that you've enjoyed for so long? So
I'm sitting here smiling. You have done your homework. So when I was 5 years old, my mom bought me bright yellow Panasonic ball and chain radio for my birthday. And a couple of the loves of my life came out of that. First of all, I loved listening to the Beatles. I turned 5 in 1970, so it was really the last year they were a group as a group. So I listened to a lot of music on the radio. And then the other thing was radio news. And it really captured my imagination. So this is when the greats of the industry were, on the radio. Charles Collingwood, Eric Sevareid, Walter Cronkite. And they were telling these stories about what was going on around the world. And I could see the images they were talking about. They used their language to describe things. And I could see it visually, and it grabbed me right away. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do radio news when I grew up. So I'd be, playing with my Hot Wheels or drawing with crayons. I had the radio on next to me, and I'd be listening to the news. And so that just stuck with me.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's amazing. Like, who would have known, right? I'm sure your mother didn't know that when she bought you that this is what it would become. Did you ever talk about that with her?
No, not really. I mean, she knows what I do, and she knows I have my quirks. But if anybody sees my Teams thing or another social media thing, often it'll be that yellow Panasonic ball and chain radio. So that was the first thing that really set me on the path.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great. So, we kind of talked a little bit about WDET, but it's a public radio station. It's different than the commercial radio. What makes, in your mind, public radio so special?
Wow, that's a great question. I think a few things are important. First of all, we've got more time than a commercial news station. On average for your commercial news station, all news radio or whatever, their average story is going to be 30 seconds long, 40 seconds long. We do some shorter stories like that, but we might have a feature story that's 3 minutes long. We might have a feature story that's 6 minutes long. We might have an interview that's 6 minutes long. So we can really go into depth into, what issue we're talking about. We can talk with multiple people within one feature about a story and really, pull away the leaves of, any given story. So that's important. I think the other thing that's important about public radio is, we're public, right? Most of our funding comes from individuals in the community. We're not beholden to any, commercial entities. We don't have to do something one way or another because a business that advertises on our station wants something this way or that way. So that, that gives us a lot of leeway to look at the important things and look at the truth of those things. I don't think there's anything wrong with commercial radio. I've got a lot of friends who work in commercial radio and have over the years. It's just we can do some things differently because, I guess the guardrails are off with a lot of things.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I mean, I think that's it's you're right. There's all kinds of variety and types of things that you're able to do, and then the programming as well, right? I mean, the programming is usually much different than on a commercial radio. I mean, whether it's a music program or it has a different feel and a flair to it. Well, actually, not a flair. It's a very, I always view public radio as it's a very thoughtful kind of listener audience, I would assume. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think by and large across the country, public radio stations skew higher than average on income. They skew higher than average on education, but we're offering something to everybody. And I think the other difference is compared to commercial radio stations, we're not here to try to, get great ratings. That's not our primary goal. We do want to make sure that people are enjoying what we're playing for them and want to listen to what we do. But, what we decide to put on the air isn't driven by the ratings, right? So when it comes to music, we're not going to be in that pop realm, right, where so many stations are. That's not going to be it for us. And when it comes to news or conversation, we're not going to have the sorts of shows that are really highly politicized and there's a lot of argument back and forth. For us, it's really about having civil conversations where we can talk about the issues and hopefully get to some solutions, as opposed to, creating bluster and making people angry on one side or the other.
Yeah, no, that's a great service of public radio, and I appreciate the fact that you gave our listeners that overview. I think those that listen to public radio, that listen to this show, they probably feel it. Those that don't, you should try it out. So, Jerome, tell me, give me a little overview of WDET, and then, take me through how you came to work there. And then, when you started, kind of your career trajectory there, give folks a window, if you will, into your career in that station.
Okay. Well, let me think about that for a second. I guess let me tell you a little bit about the station first. We're Detroit's public radio station. We were founded actually by the United Auto Workers Union back in 1948. And then a few years later, we got sold to Wayne State University for the princely sum of $1. What do we play? Mostly news during the week. We have a lot of national shows, and then we do a lot of local news within those national shows. We do have a daily talk show that we run every morning and every evening to talk about local issues. That's called Detroit Today.
Yep.
We've got a midday show where it's arts and culture, but often people think arts and culture, they think about the symphony or the art institute. But for us, it's really about, what is the art and culture of Detroit. And so, we do a lot of stories about hip hop or techno music. We do a lot of stories about new and up and coming artists here in Detroit. So that's mostly what we have during the week. The weekend is something completely different. We've got a number of music shows that we run during the weekend. And the idea is, you want to keep on top of what's going on in the world during the week. But on the weekend, you want to kick back and, relax. And whether you are, painting the garage or having a barbecue, you want to have some music to keep you company. And so that's kind of how we program the station. As far as me, I got sidetracked a little bit after college, and I went out to San Francisco for a few years. But I came back to Detroit and really, really wanted to make a mark in radio. So I came back, and this is I'll tell you how I got in at WDET.
Yeah.
I'd made some calls, and I made calls, and I made calls. And of course, if you're just a nobody, which I was at the time, not often are you going to get called back. Well, the general manager of the station was on with a legendary jazz host during a fundraiser. And that's when a public radio station says, oh, if you like, what we're doing, give us a call, send us some money. So I called and made a gift during their shift, and the general manager called me the next day.
Wow.
And so we had a conversation about, what I was interested in and whatnot. And it took some time. But eventually I did an internship at the station and then got hired as a news producer. And so since that time, I've worked in a lot of different capacities at WDET. So a news producer, a reporter, assistant news director, senior news editor. I left for a short period of time to become news director at a station in Ann Arbor, came back to be, news director here in Detroit, and, have been here altogether been here 30 years. And so it's home. Detroit's home. I love Detroit, and I love doing news in Detroit.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a wonderful story as it relates to just, the frankly, the ingenuity that and the idea of like, hey, I'm going to call when the general manager's on the show, and I'm going to make a gift. Like, this guy's going to pay attention to me. They're going to pay attention. I think that's a great example of what a young journalist or a young PR person, you gotta make your opportunity, and that's what it sounds like you did, Jerome.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There are a lot of people, looking for jobs in the industry, and that's always the way it's been and always will be the way it will be. But yeah, you have to think, all right, how am I gonna show up? How am I gonna be able to take advantage of this situation, just so I'm seen? And so yeah, a little creativity can go a long way.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because you have really spearheaded an effort there at the station, to provide opportunities and internships at WDET. I didn't get a chance to do one early on in my career at Wayne State. Had some friends that did. They loved it. Why are internships so important in journalism? Why does it matter?
Wow.
And tell me about your program too. I'm sorry, I should have said that.
Yeah, no, that's a fabulous question. I think a lot of young people think all that it takes to be on radio or on TV is to be able to talk, right? I think people will say, "Oh, I'm a good talker. I'll go and do this job," but consequently, there are a lot of people that are interested in the industry, and it takes work to get into the industry. So an internship gives you that opportunity in a couple of ways. You learn how to do what's important. You learn how to do the things large and small that you'll be doing when you get a job, right? You learn what you need to do to apply for a job. And I think at the same time, you're networking, right? You're meeting folks who are in the industry. They're teaching you. They're telling you about what you need to know. And then they're there. They know about jobs that are opening up. And so they go, "Hey, I just heard, there's this job opening up in Madison, Wisconsin. This is something that you should apply for." Or, "Hey, they are starting a new news wing in Tupelo, Mississippi. You should apply for one of those jobs." And so consequently, we've had a good deal of success in training interns, getting them job ready, and then, going on and saying, apply for these jobs. So we have people working all over the country who've come out of our internship program. Interns are important to me. It's a personal mission of mine. I think, none of us completely pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. There are always people who are helping us, and we are, moving forward on their shoulders. And that's how I think about it. I always said, the only way I can be sure that there's going to be quality public radio when I'm ready to retire is if I'm doing something about it, right? If I'm contributing and getting journalists into the mix now, in 70 or 80 years when I retire, then I know that public radio will be in good hands.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's a great way to look at it, and that's giving back to the industry that seems as if it's given you so much. I mean, I think that's that's something that I don't think people think enough about, and it's clear that you have thought about it and you're on that mission.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing, public radio, I think it's important for Detroit to have those sorts of young people. And as they get more experience, wizened reporters out there covering the stories that matter, and elsewhere around the country, it's important to have people working on those stories, using those skills to let whatever community know what's going on.
Right. Well, so you said, young Detroit students, Jerome, you're, for those that don't know, Jerome's a tried and true Detroiter. He grew up in the city, lives in the city now, chose to raise his family in the city. So there's the next generation of Vaughns that are coming up in the city of Detroit and going off and doing great things. What inspired you? Like, why did you do it? Why did you think, you and your family would benefit from the experience of kind of growing up in the city like you did as a kid?
Wow. Well, I'm completely biased. Detroit is my favorite place on the entire planet. There's something special about Detroiters. there's a work ethic here. There's an attitude of doesn't matter how bad things might look, we're going to find a way out of it. There's a famous T-shirt here that is everybody versus Detroit, and that really is the right attitude, right? We're going to work hard. We're going to succeed no matter what the odds are. There's something about that. Detroit is also like it's like a small town in a lot of ways, right? I mean, we've got 650, 700,000 people in the city and 4 million people in the region. But it's a friendly place, right?
Right.
Can have a conversation on the street. If, my wife has this story about being in the grocery store and with, a couple of our kids, and there was a woman with a small kid next to her, and she was out of diapers, and so she asked my wife for a diaper, and my wife said, "Yeah, there's no shame in that. There's no problem with that. There's no haughtiness. Oh, how dare you ask me for something?"
Right.
It's like, here, this is going to help you. Yeah, let's, we'll take care of that. So that's why I love Detroit, and it was a real decision for me, right, when my wife and I got married, we got our house. My wife is from Seattle, and we had to make a decision. All right, do we live in Detroit? Do we live in Seattle? And my wife feels about Seattle the way I feel about Detroit, but she really wanted to be in Detroit as well. And, we felt like we could do something. We could make a difference in Detroit, and I think we have made a difference in Detroit.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, that's I don't know. As a Detroiter, like, we love it. Like, I kind of felt like a turncoat a little bit when I left, but I actually think it's broadened my experience, and hopefully I can give that back, what I've learned, one day. But I think it's this your Detroit versus everybody story. I think that's great. It's that shirt. So I have one of those. I go back often, and when I go back, I try to bring a piece of memorabilia back. And so I was wearing it the other day, and this woman stops me and she goes, "Detroit versus everybody. What is that? Are you from there? Like, what's that from?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Oh, I'm from Toledo. I know Detroit. Detroit's great. Da 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 da." And it was just crazy. And here I am, all the way out in San Diego. So, Detroit definitely carries its own. It has its own brand. Its own way of doing things, and I think people recognize that.
Yeah, exactly. And I just, I love the city, and I love being here.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, your family a couple times, and I'll never forget when I think it was kind of the first time, or one of the first times we really maybe got into it, where you shared a good amount about your family, like, and I think we were having a beer on the rooftop of Motor City Brewing Works, if I remember right, and that's down in Midtown. And you shared with me that you and your wife had a very inspiring way of thinking about educating your children. And would you mind sharing that with our listeners and how it's going? I mean, so far with that.
Yeah, that was a little while ago, but my wife and I we decided to homeschool our kids, and we have homeschooled all of our kids at different points. Our first one we homeschooled up until 8th grade. The next 6 we've homeschooled or are homeschooling all the way through, and then our youngest we've homeschooled for several years, but we decided to send him to a public school, and he was in public school for a few years, and now he's at a charter school. It's just was something we felt we needed to do, and it's been very good. I think we've gotten the results we've wanted. Kid number 6 started college this year, so we've had, we've several in school, 3 in school right now and 3 out of school, and then 2 youngers who haven't gotten to college yet. So the idea has been right for us. I'll just say, one of the things, and you don't know this yet because we haven't really talked about it, but my wife really got into learning about reading issues and reading difficulties, and she did a lot of work with the public school that was around the corner from us, and she's actually written a book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just out called Bus Stop Blues, and the idea is for kids who are much older and are having trouble reading, that it's a book or a group of books that will help them read, but not be sort of stories like Dick and Jane or Pat the Bunny, right?
Yeah.
If you're in middle school and you're having trouble reading, these books are such that they're about the civil rights battle. Like one of them is called I Am a Man, and so the idea there is, the language is simplified, but the concept, the ideas in the book are not simple, and so we are hoping that's gonna take off. But my wife and I, we're a couple eggheads.
Well, you're so much more than an egghead, and I think that's great. That I'll make sure I get the link, and I'm going to put that into the description of this podcast, so that folks can check that out, because I think that'd be really important for folks to see, and maybe there's some families out there who have kids that would benefit from that.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I think that would be fantastic. I'd love to scroll the website and see. Are there, before we get into the breaking news round, I got a couple more kind of going back to the journalism world, your experience kind of questions, and then we'll get in this breaking news round. Is that okay?
That is fine.
All right. So tell me this. So you mentioned Seattle. Your wife is from Seattle. I spent a little time in Seattle. And because of my experience in Detroit and WDET and meeting you and stuff like that, when I got back when I was in PR in these towns, I said, I got to seek out, the public radio station. So, in San Diego here, it's KPBS. In Seattle, it's KUOW. Are there cross relationships? Do you all work together? Do you know people from these stations? Or is it kind of like everyone's their own kind of, little station in their own town and they don't talk, or there's no cross discussion? Which way is it? Great question. We all sort of, work collaboratively through our network, National Public Radio. But we meet and we talk at conferences. We know each other's work. And funny you should ask about KUOW in Seattle. Yeah.
The general manager there was the general manager here in Detroit that I made the call when she was on the air, Karen Mathis.
Oh, wow.
And so she's the general manager there at KUOW now. And so whenever I'm in town, I try to go and see her for a little bit. But yeah, you make connections. Public radio is like other media. People can move around. Work their way up from a small market to a larger market, or, move from this place to this place. So you get to know a lot of people. And then when there's a connection, maybe there's a story in, Chicago that has some Detroit connection. I feel free to call up the people in Chicago at the Chicago Public Radio Station and say, hey, this is going on. What can you tell me? What sort of people can you point me to? The same the other way around. So, it's sort of like a fraternity or sorority in that respect. When you need something, you call, and when somebody calls, you try to help them out all you can.
That's awesome. That reciprocal relationship. I mean, I think that's fantastic. You're like a family essentially. Like you can lean on each other as you need, and then you learn from each other at the conferences and so forth. I like that. I'm glad that they do work together, because sometimes you hear stories, like I'll hear a story from a different NPR station out here, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that, they're bringing it in. There's a reason. There's a tie. So it's good to know that you all work together behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think there are very few of us in this business for the money. We're in it for the mission, for the journalism, for the letting people know what they need to know. So any way we can do that, we'll do that.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you this. This maybe is more of a philosophical kind of question, but like in your 30 years at DET, you're in the Journalism Hall of Fame in Michigan. In your experience, in like what you've seen, how broadcast journalism has evolved over time, what does the future hold for, in particular, radio journalism?
Wow. If I knew the answer to that, I could probably have $1 million. Things are moving and changing really very quickly. A lot of reasons, right? The internet is where things are happening. Social media is where things are happening. But just when you think, radio, I don't know, is it on the rocks? Podcasting comes along, and so that has really taken off. Folks still love audio. They still want to be able to listen things while they're using their hands and eyes doing something else. And so podcasting has really taken off. Music is coming out in different forms now, whether it's, Spotify or this or that. But, I think news and conversation is really still something important on radio, and will continue to be something important on radio, especially when things happen unexpectedly. Radio can turn around a story really quickly and get it out so that people know, whether it is, something important that's happened in Washington, D.C., or, whether there's severe weather coming your way. That you can get that information instantaneously. I think, people really thought back in the 50s, people thought, well, TV's coming out. Is radio going to survive? And it managed to survive. And then, in the 80s, when there was a lot of consolidation of the industry, people thought, is radio going to be the same? Well, radio changed, but it's survived. And so I'm an optimist. I think some form of radio will be here for a long time to come. But I think there are going to be a lot of developments and inventions that I can't even imagine that will continue to change the media landscape. Yeah.
Well, let me follow up on that real quick. You mentioned the podcast. Obviously, we're on a podcast, Flack Talk. How does the station utilize podcast platforms, to share either shows or news? Is that it's something you're doing, right? So that your listeners can listen in a different way. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And we do it in a few ways. So, if we, our daily talk show, Detroit Today, that airs live on the radio, but then we turn it into a podcast so that, if you want to listen to it at 1:30 in the morning, you can listen to it at 1:30 in the morning. Some other things we do, we will do a series of stories, and maybe we'll do some additional interviews around those stories and make a podcast out of that. So people can hear the story and some behind the scenes sorts of things as well. And we've had some success with that. I think that, the difference with a podcast is you can do something for an odd length of time. You can have a 20-minute podcast, right? It's hard to do that on the radio because that means then you've got another 40 minutes to fill.
Right.
But, on a podcast, 37 minutes works because people aren't looking at the time that way. It doesn't have to fit within any specific, time guardrail. It can be what it needs to be. And also it gives you a chance to be a little more niche, right? You can do stories that maybe not everyone will be interested in, but if a certain segment is interested in it, you can make a podcast. So that's something really important too.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate you really going through that kind of that connection and that between podcast and radio, because I think that it's important as the industry evolves for people to understand, frankly, where the opportunity to even do a podcast or hear podcasts came from. It all started from radio, if you really think about it, the evolution, as you kind of pointed out. Well, so in this podcast, we try to keep you as the guest not here very long, and we try to keep our listeners not having to get past about 45 minutes if we can keep that. So how about we go into our breaking news rounds, like do breaking news. It's kind of like I get to ask you a bunch of kind of random questions that are just off the cuff, but they're kind of 1-2 word answers. They don't have to be really long. I don't think we're going to ask you anything too embarrassing, but just kind of some fun stuff to get to know you even more.
That's fine. You ask me anything you want to. I have no shame.
No shame. So, Jerome, give me one word that describes how you felt when you learned that you were going to be inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame in 2018.
Stunned.
Okay, now I want to know why you felt stunned.
I'm a pretty modest guy. I work hard. I try to help people, and I don't think of myself in that sort of term, in that sort of way, right? It's always great to be recognized for the hard work, but I don't think about it that way. I don't think about myself that way. So that's why I was stunned.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Well, yeah, you are a modest guy, but you're a Hall of Famer, Jerome. You're a Hall of Famer.
And I'm very happy about that.
Yeah. Okay, so let folks know. I don't know if we talked about this, but tell me, at least in this podcast, what neighborhood do you live in now in Detroit, and what's your favorite neighborhood to visit?
Wow, that's a hard. Well, I can tell you which one I live in. I live in North Rosedale Park. It's on the west side of town. My favorite neighborhood to visit. Wow. I don't know that I have an answer for that. I mean, there's so many great places I like to go and see. I work in Midtown. I like the riverfront. I like neighborhoods that are up and coming. I like neighborhoods that have been around for a while and are changing. So I don't really have a set one that I like to go to. I like driving around as part of my job. One of the things I really like to do is, just drive around looking for, story ideas. So that's always fun, just covering the whole town.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot of great neighborhoods. I understand why it's hard to pick just one to visit. How many times in your life has someone told you your voice was made for radio?
I don't know, a few times. I haven't counted, but I've never thought of it that way. Obviously I've never thought of my voice being that way. I just think, well, my voice is my voice, and I'm going to, tell the stories that I need to tell. I always feel like I don't have one of those older radio voices that people look for in the 60s and 70s. It's Jerome Vaughn's voice. So here and there, but I just use it if I need to.
Yeah. Let me ask you this now. Is there any special things that you do to make sure that you don't get sick, like you can't use your voice?
Well, I'll tell you the one that comes to mind right away. I have to be very restrained when I go to concerts.
Okay.
the reason why, before I got into radio, I would go to a concert and I would just sing with the songs at the top of my lungs, and I'd shred my voice for a week, right?
Wow.
And so when I got into radio, I was like, oh yeah, I can't do that anymore. And it's really hard. It's really hard to do that. Because that's why you go to a concert. You want to have a good time and you want to sing with the 10,000 other people. So that's it. Other than that, I try to take care of myself and get enough rest and drink a lot of water and just do those regular things. I don't have any sort of special routine though.
Okay. What do you have a favorite kind of food and why?
Wow. My favorite kind of food, I'd probably say, that's hard. I'm gonna give you two.
Okay.
I love Mexican food of all sorts. Southwest Detroit has a large Hispanic population, so there are a lot of great restaurants there where I can eat a ton. And the other thing is, I've always been a breakfast guy. I hate getting up early in the morning, but I'll eat breakfast any time of day. So the other thing on that list is pancakes.
That's good. You like plain buttermilk, or do you like some blueberries and strawberries in them, or what do you do?
The answer is yes to all. But buttermilk's my favorite. That's generally what I make at home. But I'll eat them all.
So, is there a journalist that you admire and why? Or maybe
living or dead.
It could be. No, it doesn't matter. It could be somebody that you either admired growing up, or it could be someone that you're currently admire today. Either way.
Wow. Let me throw out a couple really quickly. Don Gagne, who's at NPR, he has done great work over the years. He worked in the White House press corps for a number of years. I've worked with him when he was at WDET. He's fabulous. Walter Cronkite, for those of you who are younger, was the television anchor in the 60s and 70s. He reported on all of the drama in the 60s and 70s. He's great. And then I think there are a lot of other folks who are coming up now. One person I work with here, her name is Nargis Rahman, and she's just getting it done. She's talking to diverse communities about their things that they're working on, what they're striving to achieve. So those are a few people off the top of my head. I think I could probably come up with another 30 or 40 over time.
Yeah. You said something, and I'm going to kind of divert a little bit from this breaking news round. You said something, and I want to ask you, you talked about the importance of that reporting on diverse communities. As an African-American news leader, news director, how important is representation in journalism? I've talked to a lot of folks. Coming from Detroit, like I came to really understand and respect the importance of it. But for a lot of folks out there, I don't know if they fully understand that. Would you mind sharing your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is extremely important to have a diverse newsroom, and the reason is different people bring different perspectives to the newsrooms, different perspectives to stories and storytelling. If you have a newsroom where everyone is the same sort of person, then you're not going to have an understanding or an insight into certain communities that exist within your city. One of the reasons I mentioned Nargis is she's Bengali. And so she has insight into the Muslim and Bengali communities here in Detroit. That's not something that I have insight in. That's not a community that I'm part of. And so I think that's a perfect example. I think another important part of that is to have inroads where you can have conversations with those communities, where you can get to know those communities, even if you're not part of those communities. I think journalists all too often are, they're arrogant. I think we should do this story because I know everything. And that's a bad way to go. And, journalism has been that way, not everywhere, but a lot of journalism has been that way for a very long period of time, decades and decades. And that's why there are underserved communities and folks whose stories don't get told. Not to go too far into it, but, you're a Detroiter.
Yeah.
We had a huge civil disturbance in 1867. And there was a commission called the Kerner Commission that looked at civil disturbances around the country in 67 and 68. And one of the things that commission found was that, minority communities were not having their stories told. The problems that existed in those communities weren't being surfaced by journalists. Solutions weren't being looked for because those stories weren't being surfaced, and that led to these disturbances. And so it's important, and it's something that we've known is important since the 60s, and yet we can revert back into old ways.
Yeah, no, that you're right. I mean, I really appreciate the fact that you gave that perspective for folks, and thanks for the answer before that sparked that question. I thank you for that perspective. Go ahead.
I just want to say, I mean, you know me, but your listeners don't in that respect. I mean, that's something I'm pretty passionate about, obviously.
Yeah.
It's something that's important to Detroiters, of all ages, and that's why I get passionate about it.
Yeah. No, it's something that needs a passion behind it and people that are willing to feed that passion. And thank you for doing it. Thank you so much for doing it. Jerome, this has really been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. We kind of walked a little bit down memory lane. We've showed people a little bit more about WDET. We've learned about you, which is the core purpose of this podcast, is to learn about the journalists. And before I let you go, I want to ask, just like you would ask me if I was representing someone, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our Flack Talk listeners before I let you go?
Oh, wow. Hundreds of thousands of things, but I guess I'll say, when you are working for a client or you are searching for a job, it's really important to, be ethical about what you're doing. Work for the truth. And it's not all about the money. I mean, I'm not saying, don't work for money, but I'm saying, just you want to make sure that at the end of the day, you can look yourself in the mirror and know that you're serving whoever you're serving, right? You're serving your community, serving your client. You just want to be able to do that with a sense of pride.
Jerome, that's a great way to end today's show. Hey, thank you for being on Flack Talk, Jerome.
Well, it was great to be here, and it's been great talking to you, James.
If you liked Flack Talk and want to learn more about your favorite muckrakers and newsbreakers, please hit the subscribe button or visit flacktalk.com. New Flack Talk episodes with James Canning air every other Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.